Okay, checking in on the pod is Max Goodman of NJ.com. He'll be with us every week during spring training and will soon be down in Tampa, boots on the ground in about a week or so. How you doing, Max?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good. As we were just talking, we can get this off the top. I'm very excited about best shape of his life, baseball shape of his life, Skinny Stanton, and I know you wanted to talk about it too. So, what are your thoughts there?
Well, first off, the first time that he stepped on the field in Tampa, as you just mentioned, I'm not down there just yet, but the pictures of him and the videos, he does look
Yep.
very much different. Like I wasn't necessarily expecting to see that much of a change,
Right.
but he does look leaner. So check for that, right? Because that was his mission to get leaner and lighter this offseason. The one video of the ball that he hit really hard in live BP, it's hard from that angle to see just how much his swing or his stance or his approach or anything like that has changed. So I'm looking forward to when games start to get the center field angle to see if we can start to pick up on different things with him because it does seem like he has made changes, and that's going to be important for him, right? Because you have to totally reevaluate after the season that he had. It's not just going to be losing weight and sticking with the same approach and the same swing because he has such an unorthodox um, swing and approach when he's up there. So uh, definitely looking forward to seeing that because if the Yankees get a better Stanton, it's hard to really quantify how much that would mean to this team.
Huge.
Because yeah, I mean, if he can stay healthy, I'm not saying he's going to win an MVP, right? Like this isn't 2017 Stanton, but if he can be a consistent producer and drive runs in the middle of the lineup, I mean, that just opens up so many doors for the offense as a whole. But he's got to stay on the field. And as much as he looked good in his first day of live BP, we have many months ahead of us where he's got to prove that he can run the bases and stay out there.
Of course, it's February 21st. Long way to go. I think to your point about the lineup, if it's one of, or not one of, I think at least two of DJ Stanton, Rizzo, need to rebound in order for this lineup to truly be a force this season. It's going to be tough to be a consistent lineup with just Judge and Soto in the middle, and then Gleyber Torres as your third best hitter. That is not enough. That's not a complete enough lineup, in my opinion, to compete legitimately for a championship. So two of those three key pieces, because they're all going to be there, assuming relative healthy. DJ, Rizzo, Stanton, like you got to get something from at least two of them.
Right. And I think that, the Yankees will be able to get away with the fact that they just have an insanely good duo in terms of
Yep.
Soto and Judge. Like they will win some games where the production is isolated between those two. But if you can have production from the 4 and 5 spots in the lineup as well, it it'll make this offense exponentially better because you look back at last year and isolated production was the name of the game for this team. They just never strung hits together. There were no rallies. You could pitch a guy differently knowing that the next two hitters after him were struggling or not completely healthy. And if this lineup gets back to you think of the Yankees from the last couple decades, and it's a lineup that's so treacherous for opposing pitchers to get through. And that's what I think the improved balance and the better athleticism, having lefties in there, having guys that get on base. I mean, if Alex Verdugo has a good year out of the bottom of the order, if Anthony Volpe and Austin Wells
Yep.
are better in the bottom of the order, it's just, again, I'll say it again, it's opening up so many doors for this team because, how do you get through that kind of lineup if you can't pitch around Judge and Soto? But if Rizzo and Stanton are both slumping right behind them, you can pitch around those guys and then, take the risk with a couple men on base and two outs. But if those guys are getting driven in, then they're firing on all cylinders.
Go cherry pick any single season. Go point your finger at any season and look at the teams that are deep in the playoffs. Those lineups have depth in them, and there's a complete lineup there where the 7, 8, 9 hitters are not automatic outs. Okay, like it's very rare that you're going to find a deep playoff team where they are very top heavy in the lineup because in October. Sometimes Judge is going to go 0 for 4, and then what happens? Like someone else is going to need to pick up the slack. And yeah, I guess there it kind of starts with injuries because before Stanton and Rizzo, let's focus there, can even have good seasons, they need to be healthy, and that's something that they have not been able to do. I know Rizzo with the concussion last year, and Stanton consistently the last few years. But I found this quote from Garrett Cole last week very interested. We get injured too much as a group. We need to improve. Loved that quote from Cole. It's all something we knew, but the fact that he's just going to sit there and tell you, and it's also the fact that he's a guy who goes and pitches every day, every turn on the mound. He makes 32 starts a year. So this is coming from a guy who has stayed healthy, saying, "Yeah, we need to be healthier as a group."
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the issue when you organize a roster with guys that are in the tail end of their careers. When you mention LeMahieu, Stanton, Rizzo, but with how much they're being paid and the expectations of what they're going to do production wise, I mean, you need them to stay on the field. And Rizzo was a good player for the first couple of months before he had the concussion. And
Very good,
LeMahieu,
actually.
once he started to distance himself from the toe in the second half, he was looking a little more like the vintage guy who's going to put the ball in play and wreak havoc with runners in scoring position, that kind of player. So, I mean, if they can get not vintage versions, but just resurgent seasons from those three. And if Glaber's going to have another solid year and a walk year, Verdugo's in a walk year, I mean, just you factor all of that in with Judge and Soto because you can trust in them if they can stay on the field for the whole season to have great years. That gives you a top offense in the American League, or at least in contention for one.
Yep.
But there are some what ifs there, right? And I think that that's still the trend this spring. Can they stay healthy? Can they produce consistently, and can that group gel on a day-to-day basis? Because this is MLB. It's such a marathon that as much as on paper it looks like this offense can be really good, and that's been the trend with what we're hearing in spring training. The Yankees like what they have on offense, but they usually do going into every season, and so they've got to prove after last year that they can live up to those expectations.
Yeah, Rizzo up until the concussion last year was actually having one of his better seasons in recent memory. He was really good, on track for another 30 home runs, and he was hitting, I forget his exact batting average at the time, but I think it was in like the 280s or something when he went down. So yeah, that was a huge loss for the team last year. And then obviously Judge with the toe. Judge also spoke that yeah, the toe is going to be constant maintenance, and said for the rest of my career. Now, I'm not talking just this year, rest of my career, constant maintenance on this toe to make sure it does not flare up.
Yeah, I think you can look at that in a couple ways. Like one, the panicking Yankee fan will think that that's going to make it an injury concern for the rest of his career. And yeah, I mean, constant maintenance means that it is something that you have to keep an eye on. And maybe he can't play 162 going forward as he starts to get older. He's a big guy, a lot of weight on the toe and such. But if they're trusting him to play center field, I don't think it's going to be an issue. He's certainly healthy right now. And he was still playing at an MVP level when he came back from the injury at the end of last season. So if you're getting that player moving forward, it doesn't seem like it's a downgrade to the other guys we were talking about when they were compromised by injuries. It was a completely different player. So I don't think that fans should necessarily go into depression mode based on hearing that Judge isn't going to be the same guy. I think he will still be one of the best, if not the best hitters in the league. But something to keep in the back of your minds in case he, hits the base hard or something like that. Like it's
Right.
just you got to be careful with it.
Or like, how many times have we heard, oh, we're going to get Judge off his feet in Tampa because of the turf
Right.
or something like that. So, and that's not something, I mean, that's something they've done always, but seem to be, I guess the year 2022 when he hit 62 home runs, that didn't seem to be as much of a thing. But in the years following, 2019, 2021, that was definitely a thing we heard a lot. Is, oh, we're going to get Judge back to back days off because tomorrow's a day off, and today's a travel day, so he's sitting, stuff like that. So wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that this year.
But hey, it's also worth noting that Boone has already mentioned that Judge is going to DH more often this season if he's starting in center field, and so by bringing in Trent Grisham and
Yep.
having an elite center fielder, that makes that easier. And Stanton might be the
That,
one
I was just gonna say
caveat.
that means Stanton needs to play the outfield though, and so that is the complete wild card here. Because if Stanton can't play the outfield once or twice a week, how are you going to afford to be able to DH Judge twice a week?
And you may want to DH Soto on some
Sure.
days because he's the weaker defender. Yeah, I mean that's it's a good problem to have more than 3 capable outfielders, but how many capable outfielders do they really have? Because I think that's the narrative every spring, that, you know, Stanton's going to play a little bit more outfield this year if he's healthy, and sometimes that brings the best out of him on offense when he feels like more of a complete player. I don't think they should force the issue with that, especially if Grisham is a better offensive player this year. You know, who knows if he works with new hitting coach Rousen, if he's going to take his offensive production to the next level, because I think he hit under 200 definitely last year, if not both of the last 2 years. Maybe he has a career year offensively and the speed plays. Because we know he's an elite defender out there. And if you have him as a capable center fielder a couple days a week, you can put Judge back and right and have Soto at DH. But if Stanton's playing well, you want to make sure Stanton's still in the lineup. And so you may see a very different outfield on a day-to-day basis, and Boone's just going to have to juggle the playing time in that sense.
You might also see it if a lefty's on the mound. You might see you might not see Verdugo in the lineup at all.
Right.
And then but then that's the question, is who's playing left field, because they're definitely not sticking Stanton in left field. And so that would be Soto in left, Stanton in right, Grisham in center, Judge DH in that, if we're looking to get Judge a half day off type of thing.
And I do think that Grisham shouldn't be swept under the rug here in terms of, obviously he's in the Soto trade. Like, he won't be viewed the same way, but I do think he's going to play quite a bit. And that also could mean him coming in late in games as a defensive replacement. But then you start to put more pressure on Oswaldo Cabrera or whoever else is an outfielder, because if you're taking guys out of games, then your bench is going to start to be depleted, and you turn around and it's the 10th inning or something, and all you have is a Cabrera to come in and replace somebody, and he has a big at bat. I mean, the depth that they have is a little unproven at this point, because they didn't go out and sign or acquire a veteran. There were rumors about, you know, Tony Kemp and Gio Urshela and those guys recently. The bench right now, and we'll talk about catcher, but it's Cabrera and Peraza are your utility position players, and they haven't necessarily proven that they can be consistent producers on offense yet. Cabrera, the expectations were so high for him last year after the rookie season he had.
Were they though? Like, I'm trying to put myself back in a year ago at this time, and I know it was basically Hicks and him fighting for the left field job in spring last year, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But didn't Hicks win the job?
You look back at the playing time, and Cabrera did have his opportunities. I don't remember who started on opening day, and I guess that doesn't really matter that much in terms of who won the job. But yeah, I mean, they were rolling with the two internal options that they had, and both of them didn't, you know, grasp the role and run with it, which is, I think, what they were hoping for.
Cabrera was okay when he got called back up at the end of the season, right?
He was better,
Yeah.
but I think you can still look at that as a sophomore slump basically the entire year.
But realistically, what is Oswaldo Cabrera? Like he's exactly what you described, a bench piece. He's not a starting player.
Right. I mean, he's spunky. I think he's a great clubhouse presence, seeing him around. Always a smile on his face. You know, he's going to work hard. And yeah, I mean, the defensive versatility isn't something that everyone even anticipated, right? Because when he was a rookie and he started making these crazy catches in the outfield, that
one
made him
game,
even more
remember
valuable.
the one game he like rob a home run and like dive into the stands down the line or something like that?
I remember the robbed home run and right.
Or then I think it was like that weekend, didn't he play third base or something like that? And then he like dove over the tarp. It was something crazy where he made two unbelievable plays at two completely different positions all in one weekend.
I don't know if they would put him in center, but he can legitimately play every other position.
He would probably be, I mean, because we saw IKF quite a bit in center field last year. Right. And so the depth in center field to start the season, at least until whenever Jason Dominguez comes back, is Grisham, Judge, and then Verdugo, I guess, probably would be the third option.
Yeah. But I mean, now that you mentioned Dominguez, I mean, this entire conversation we've had about the outfield totally shifts once Dominguez is back to being healthy. And then you have even more of a surplus of capable outfielders, because then is Verdugo not an everyday outfielder at that point? Probably not, if everybody's healthy and playing well. And certainly if Stanton is at DH. So that's something to keep an eye on these first couple of months, is that Dominguez will be back at some point, potentially early on in the summer. And once he's there, I mean, Grisham won't play as much probably. Verdugo, we'll see how he does, but does he become more expendable in terms of the playing time picture. And
Well, I think you then have the luxury to pick your spots with these guys.
right,
And like Verdugo, his numbers against righties are really, really good. Like he's got like I think a 900 OPS against righties. Against lefties, or I think last year he had a 900 OPS against righties. Against lefties, horrible. So you can pick your spots a little bit more with Verdugo.
yeah, and even Judge has mentioned that Verdugo could be used in the leadoff spot too, because
I could see that as
he
well.
was there with Boston and produced well there.
Especially if DJ's not consistent. That's like you're not going to pencil in DJ LeMahieu at leadoff if he's hitting 256 again.
Sure, and that's the bottom line with all of this, is that you're taking an outfield that had uh, Jake Bowers, Billy McKinney, Willie Calhoun, and Cabrera was your starter in left,
Yep.
and IKF was playing out there quite a bit. Harrison Bader wasn't the productive offensive player that they hoped he would be, and now your outfield is all of these guys that we've talked about, and you're bringing up Dominguez as a midseason acquisition, and if his 8 games last year are any indication, he's going to be a force. I mean, obviously that we have to temper those expectations a little bit because he still is a rookie and he hasn't seen big league pitching that much. And that's why I think that his reps in AAA will be very important to make sure that he's healthy, but also to get back into the swing of things. Um, but you suddenly have 4 or 5 capable outfielders, and the Yankees took that from a glaring weakness to a legitimate strength this winter, and I think that they deserve some applause there for that, because that was an issue they should have addressed last offseason.
Going
And so
into
you
last
come
season.
in
Yeah.
with that need this winter, and they addressed it right away. So as much as there are potentially some holes in the pitching staff, or at least unproven guys that they're going to lean on, they definitely accomplished their mission in terms of making the outfield better this winter.
All right. So, what are your thoughts at the catcher spot? We mentioned it briefly, but Higgy, longtime backup catcher, not there anymore. Trevino dealt with injuries last year, but really like the first half 2022 when he was an all-star. Since then, he's defensively still been good. Offensively, I think we know what he is. I think there's I don't want to call it importance or pressure on Austin Wells, but a little bit of importance placed on Austin Wells being a contributor here.
Definitely. I think that the way that Wells produced in his 1 month with the club last year raised those expectations too, because as much as he struggled mightily early on, he ended the year
I have the numbers,
hitting
yeah.
pretty darn well.
13
And
for 41 over his last 11 games with a 900 plus over a 900 OPS in his final, 41 at bats, call it.
you saw a guy that was getting used to seeing big league pitching and starting to really flash that potential on a daily basis when he was in the lineup. And also, I was not surprised, because I think that you hear from, Tanner Swanson, the catching coordinator, and other folks in the organization, that Wells is maybe a better defender than the reputation that he has, or it's something that he's been working on quite a bit. He looked better than I thought he would on defense with those expanded opportunities. But the defense is part of the conversation here, right? Because Ben Rortvet is elite behind the plate, and you saw him working exclusively as Garrett Cole's catcher at the end of the year. And I don't believe he has an option,
No, he
meaning
doesn't.
that if Trevino is healthy, and he's not going to start spring training on time with the calf strain that he had. So we'll keep an eye on that, because an injury he had last spring turned out to be something that would end his season in the summer, and he was compromised the whole first half. If Trevino is healthy, I think he'll be your main catcher, because of the track record, the experience, the defense. He's like the backbone.
I
of
was
the
going to
pitching.
ask you about that. You think main catcher meaning, starting 3 out of 5, or is it going to be, I guess that's, it's either 2 out of 5 or 3 out of 5, but like, you know what I mean? Like, is it going to be a good amount more than Wells, do you think?
Ideally, not for the Yankees, right? I
Right.
mean, ideally, Wells takes another significant step forward, and they can use him as Cole's catcher, depending on the matchup. I don't know if Cole or Stroman or any of those guys is going to want a personal catcher, but if the Yankees can use those two as a real tandem and put them in situations where they can excel against different matchups and different ballparks or whatever it is, Rodon used Wells pretty much every time out, if I remember correctly. I don't know who has what preference, but if Wells is going to be a better defender, I think the offense is going to play. And I think that that's why he is a long-term piece for them, because his swing, we always say it for left-handers, but it really is tailor-made for the stadium. I mean, he has the pop at that position that's very rare. And if he can, handle big league pitching, I think the power is going to play and he can be a steady contributor for them. But when Trevino's at his best, he was an all-star. Maybe that was an anomaly to a certain extent, but he's a really good defensive catcher that the pitching staff wants to throw to. And I don't know how Rortvedt fits. I mean, the defense is there, right? His arm is elite, but how do you fit him in if you want Wells to take the next step as a
Right.
prospect? You got to give him that playing time.
I mean, if Wells is producing decently at the plate, like that's going to be your production from catcher, because Trevino is not he'll have his moments maybe, but he's not going to be an offensive producing catcher, and we know Rortvedt's not going to be. So unless you're comfortable, I guess you could afford this. If you're not happy with Wells, maybe his defense or his production, and you're getting production from the rest of the lineup, you can live with no offensive production from catcher. But like you just outlined, like Wells was a prospect because of his bat. He went through the minor leagues because of his bat. Like, give him that opportunity to see if he can be an offensive catcher at the major league level.
Certainly. Yeah. And again, that's what he showed at the very end of last season. That was the glimpse. And it was more than Dominguez, right? It was a couple weeks where he started to heat up and he hit that opposite field home run in Toronto. And you're like, wow,
Yeah,
that's going to play if he can do that consistently. But the good thing is that you have three capable big league catchers right now, and injuries do happen. Like we were just talking about, Trevino went down in spring training with something and tried to play through it. Wells didn't even have his spring training last year because he had
right.
the oblique
Rib. It was a
rib
rib.
injury,
Yeah.
and it knocked him out for all of spring. So
Do you know what the criticism of Wells's defense was? Because I was reading something recently where it said his pop time is actually maybe his arm strength isn't the best, but his total time to get the ball to second base is actually above average.
if I remember correctly, I think it was his arm strength. And obviously framing is so important
That's
too.
more important now than arm strength is
Yeah.
framing.
And now with the new rules, I mean, guys are stealing bases on
Right.
everybody. So I do think that Rortvedt has enough of a strong arm to control a running game. I don't remember off the top of my head where he ranks framing wise. Obviously, Trevino and
Elite.
Higashioka too. They're
Elite.
they're as elite as it gets in terms of framing. So yeah, I mean, all of that's part of the discussion, and I think that you're going to see Wells incrementally get better. This isn't a Gary Sanchez situation where defense is going to consistently be a liability. That's something that Wells really prides himself in, and something that when you talk to him, he knows that he needs to get even better. But he thinks that it's a strength of his. I believe.
I remember, well, Michael King, obviously no longer with the team, but I remember when Michael King was throwing to Austin Wells at the end of last season, he talked
Right.
about how he was impressed with Wells, his preparation for the game, and how he would go to King, the day before to map out a game plan for the start, so that he made sure they were on the same page. And I remember King talking in post game, sort of praising that. So it's not literally just about framing. Like, you also have to have you have to be on the same page as the pitcher. You have to, be in sync with the pitcher. And so I know probably for Garrett Cole, that's huge, being on the same page as the catcher. So I would love to see him throw to Wells at least a handful of times. I hate the personal catcher thing.
Yeah.
Anyone who listens to this show knows that, but like I just feel that you're pigeonholing yourself into a spot. Then, like, oh, guys only thrown to one player all year, and then what happens if you have a big game at the end of the season and that catcher's hurt? Like, the guy's not
Right.
going to be able to throw to the other catcher. Like, that just seems bad.
I mean, I'd imagine this spring that Wells will have opportunities to, at the very least, catch bullpens and maybe work with him in his spring starts. But something else that occurred to me is that Wells has quite a bit of experience with some of the new faces that are going to be used in the pitching staff too. And I don't know if that's a unquantifiable
Yeah.
experience with those guys or whatever. But if Will Warren is coming up and Clayton Beater and some of those guys that are also prospects that came up in and around the same path that Wells has been on, that it's only going to make everybody better with the experience and the familiarity and the camaraderie that those guys have behind the scenes.
All right, real quickly before we wrap up, what are your thoughts on Volpe? Because I feel like he's not been talked about certainly as much as last spring when he was fighting for a job, but kind of just I know he did one interview where he talked about like the goal is to win a World Series type of thing. It was more about the team than about himself. But what are your expectations for Volpe this year?
Oh man. I mean, he had a good rookie year, but he also had a rookie year where he fell short of expectations. I mean, when you have someone that he was what first Yankee rookie to have 20 plus homers and 20 plus steals, first Gold Glove at shortstop, or only other Gold Glove at shortstop other than Jeter. I mean, those are tremendous attributes to have or accolades to have as a first year shortstop with the expectations that come with that position in pinstripes. But anyone that evaluates him or knows him would say that him hitting 209 with a
Right.
OPS 666,
660. Yeah.
yeah, it's that is where he needs to improve. And there were stretches where he looked overmatched consistently and wasn't able to produce uh, consistently as he did in the minor leagues, right? You look at his production in full season in Double A or whatever it was. It's a guy that's a threat on offense on a daily basis, and he was oftentimes more in the black hole category, like the other spots in the lineup where he just wasn't getting it done. Um, I'll reference something that Aaron Judge said on Sean Casey's podcast. I don't know if you guys watched that. It was at the end of last week, and Judge talked extensively about the time that he's spent with Volpe over the offseason, how they've both been among the guys that are down in Tampa early over the last couple of weeks getting their work in. And Judge mentioned something that if I were Volpe's hitting coach, I would say the same thing. You focus on putting the ball in play more and using the opposite field and letting your entire skill set, the tools that allowed you to be this top prospect, to play more. Because if you're putting the ball in play, even if it's sometimes a ground ball, you're making the defense try to make a play when you have the speed to beat out some ground balls. Don't always sell out to try to hit a home run. And even if his home runs do go down a little bit this season, if the average goes up tens and tens of points,
Right.
and the on base percentage too, when you're getting on base less than, it was like 283, I think, off the top of my head. I mean, that's not going to fly.
No, because he's
And
probably going to be the 9 hitter. And
right.
so he's going to be the quote turn the lineup over guy ahead of the big top of the order. You can't be getting on 28% of the time.
So it'll come down, I think, for him to his numbers, particularly against breaking balls, need to get better. And it's just strictly like the whiff rate and the fact that he had 167 strikeouts. If he can cut down on those deficiencies, put the ball in play much more often, and yeah, he's going to run into quite a few home runs because he has some serious pop for a shortstop. And I think the ceiling is like what Bobby Witt Jr. did in his second year, I think, and that's maybe the model that Volpe can follow as someone that, yes, he's going to run into some homers, he's going to play quality defense, but on a day to day, you're seeing a guy that's gap to gap, a really tough at bat for opposing pitchers, and like you said, turning the lineup over because, like we talked about at the very beginning of this, if the veterans around Judge and Soto are hitting, I mean, it makes that 1 through 4 even better if Volpe's leading off in the 9 hole
Right.
and getting on base, and that totally changes the trajectory of an inning. So they need him to take that step forward because that's his spot. And if he can play another, because the durability is going to be there. He played in 159 games. He probably could have played in 162 last year. So I think he'll improve, certainly on offense. It's just with that experience that he gathered this past season, uh, seeing how much of a challenge big league pitching is and the work this winter, can he cut down on those parts of his game that really detracted from the flashes that made his rookie year special?
Like imagine this time last year, someone told you Anthony Volpe is going to be a 2020 guy and win the Gold Glove this year. You would have said, "Well, he's going to win the Rookie of the Year," and
Right.
he got one Rookie of the Year third place vote last year. That's it, and it's because of all those things you described. Like the highs were there. We saw flashes, some brief stretches where he looked really good, but it was so inconsistent, and it was mostly lows at the plate last year. And I think, yeah, he's got to be more consistent. Um, I don't know if there's a world at some point this summer if he's still struggling at the plate and inconsistent if he gets moved from shortstop or gets benched from shortstop. Like that would still be hard for me to envision. But I feel like there will be conversations starting if we're in June or July and he's still hitting 209 with a 660 OPS. Like you have to start to question that.
Yeah. I don't remember what time it was last year, but over the summer, I wrote something suggesting that they should consider sending him down. I think it was one of his, the valleys of his already, I'll say disappointing, but obviously we talked about some of the positives there too. It was a tough stretch for him. And you look at his numbers recently, but also over the course of his season to that point, and you wonder if he's going to be able to turn it around. But I do think that the Yankees are rolling with him. He earned that spot. He is their guy, their highly touted prospect, their first round pick. And, we could talk about Oswald Peraza and how he hasn't really had an opportunity there. If they had another, you know, proven and talented shortstop, not to say that Peraza isn't talented, but they've shown that they don't really want to use him there in an extended playing time role. So I would be surprised. It would take a step back offensively, I think, for them to consider that kind of step with Volpe, because you wonder what that would do for his confidence,
Yep.
and he
Eh,
needs to continue to see pitching in the big leagues to grow. But
Yep.
yeah, I mean, we'll see.
I at the point last year when I realized they were not going to send him down, I was like, okay, let him take his lumps, and just they stuck with him all year, and hopefully he learns and grows from this, because yeah, if not, I have high. I maybe it's unfair. I have high expectations for him this year to actually take a step forward uh, in his sophomore season. Because then you
Sure.
have to question, like, is this guy the player? Like, is this the future shortstop? Is this a future all-star caliber player like he was billed to be? Like, if it doesn't happen this year, obviously it can still happen, but then it's a lot harder to do.
And it comes down to how the lineup is performing around him too, because there were times last year where Volpe struggling was even more glaring because everybody was struggling
Yeah,
after
yeah,
Judge.
yeah,
And if I know this is redundant, but it's kind of the trend this spring, right? I mean, if everybody around him is playing well, it takes the pressure off of him. It's going to
absolutely.
put him in better situations to succeed. And I think that goes a long way for a player. It's as simple as the guys in the dugout just buzzing when they've put 10 runs on the board, right? I mean, there's
Mm.
even more pressure when it's your third at bat and, you know,
The
guys.
team has 2 hits and you're down 2-0, and it's the eighth inning. It's like, yeah,
Exactly, exactly, and it changes your approach. It adds unnecessary pressure to a situation where there will always be pressure when you're the shortstop of the New York Yankees. So if guys are on base, if you're putting rallies together, extending innings, putting crooked numbers on the board, I think all of that will contribute positively to fostering a situation where Volpe will be more successful.
cool. All right, Max, thanks again for joining, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Sounds like a plan. Have a good rest of the week.